A young food delivery driver is assaulted and humiliated during a delivery by a customer who looks down on him for his humble job and skin color, but then something happens. Brian was born in a modest neighborhood, the son of working-class parents who always faced financial struggles. His father was a bus driver, waking up early to navigate the busy streets of the city and returning only in the early evening, tired but with a warm smile for his children. His mother worked as a kitchen assistant in a small local restaurant, preparing meals from early morning and only coming home after her shift ended. Brian grew up in a simple home, but it was filled with love and unity. His parents always taught him the importance of honest work and the value of integrity, which became fundamental principles in his life. From a young age, Brian felt the need to contribute to the family expenses. Even at a young age, he sought simple jobs, like helping at the market stalls on weekends or collecting cans for recycling. These small jobs earned him some pocket money, which he made sure to hand over to his mother upon arriving home. She, always moved by her son's gesture, praised him for his effort and solidarity. This early experience shaped Brian into a determined young man who understood the importance of fighting for what he wanted and never backing down in the face of adversity. In his teenage years, Brian met Kimberly, a schoolmate who, like him, came from a humble and hardworking family. The connection between them was immediate, uniting dreams of a better future despite the difficulties they faced. They dreamed of building a life together, with a simple house filled with love. Brian worked during the day at various odd jobs, like being a helper in warehouses and stocking goods in stores, while Kimberly dedicated herself to her studies and helped her mother sell homemade bread. Shortly after turning 18, they decided to get married, facing life's challenges hand in hand. Marriage brought new responsibilities for Brian, especially after the birth of the couple's first child. Becoming a father was a turning point for him, bringing a greater sense of responsibility and the need to ensure a better future for his family. Determined to provide, he accepted any kind of work that came his way, always looking for new opportunities. After years of saving and hard work, Brian managed to buy a used motorcycle, which became his main means of livelihood as a food delivery driver in the city. Aware of the risks of his new job, Brian followed the advice of an experienced friend in the field: always record deliveries with his phone as a safety measure. This practice offered him a little more peace of mind, even knowing that the life of a delivery driver on the streets was filled with challenges and unexpected situations, from mechanical issues to unpredictable interactions with customers. Brian woke up to the sound of the alarm at 6 a.m., a familiar tone in his daily routine. He quickly stretched and headed to the kitchen, where Kimberly was already preparing coffee. "Good morning, my love," he said with a smile, hugging Kimberly from behind while she fried eggs. "Good morning, Brian," Kimberly replied, turning to give her husband a kiss. "Is today going to be hectic again?" "Yeah, I have some parts deliveries for the shop, and then I'll start the food deliveries tonight," he replied as he sat down at the table to eat quickly. Their son, a 5-year-old boy, entered the kitchen, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Daddy, are you going to work again?" "I am, champ," Brian said, bending down to be at the boy's level. "But I promise we'll play at the park on Sunday, okay?" "Okay," shouted the boy, smiling. Kimberly then urged him, "Hurry up, Brian, before you're late for your first job of the day." He finished his coffee, kissed Kimberly and their son, and left the house on his old motorcycle, which had become an essential part of his routine. On the way to the parts shop, he felt the fresh morning breeze, and for a moment, he thought about how tough life was, but also full of little moments of happiness that motivated him to keep going. Brian spent the day making parts deliveries around the city. The work was tiring, but he was used to it. When he returned home in the late afternoon, he was greeted again by Kimberly and their son. "How was your day?" Kimberly asked while serving a plate of food. "It was tiring, but I managed to finish everything," he replied, sitting down at the table with his family for a quick meal before starting the night shift. "You need to take care of yourself, Brian," Kimberly said, worry in her eyes. "You're always rushing around." "I know, love, but it's all for you," he said, trying to reassure her. "Now, let me go. The restaurant must be packed with orders." He left the house again, waving to his son who was watching him from the window, and headed toward the restaurant where he worked as a night delivery driver. Upon arrival, he was greeted by other delivery drivers who already knew him well. "Look who's here. Brian, the fastest delivery guy in the city," joked Timothy, one of the colleagues. Brian laughed. "Fast? It's the motorcycle that's slow." "So, is it busy today?" "Yeah, it seems like everyone decided to order food at the same time," Timothy replied. Meanwhile, another delivery driver, Sharon, approached and commented, "Did you see that Nicholas almost fell off his bike yesterday? That was a scare, but he's fine." "These bikes are dangerous," Brian said. "But there's no way around it, we need them to put food on the table." Soon, the restaurant attendant, Emily, called Brian. "Hey, Brian, there's a delivery for you here." He approached the counter, where Emily handed him a bag. "It's an order of tacos and burritos for someone named Mr. Garcia. It's in the Pine Hill neighborhood. Do you know where that is?" "I do," Brian replied, grabbing the bag. "Is this customer a pain?" Emily made a face. "Look, Brian, he's the most annoying of them all. He always complains about something. Be careful." Brian chuckled, somewhat carefree. "I'll try not to irritate him then, Emily." He put on his helmet, hopped on the bike, and took off for the delivery, still smiling as he remembered the attendant's words. Brian rode his motorcycle through the busy city streets, trying to locate himself in the Pine Hill neighborhood. The trip was a bit long, but he was used to it. "Looks like I'm going to need patience today," he murmured to himself, already anticipating that the delivery wouldn't be an easy one. The streets in the neighborhood were narrow and confusing, making navigation trickier, especially at night. After a few minutes of driving around, he stopped in front of a small building that seemed to be the right address. However, there was no sign of any customer waiting outside. Brian got off the bike, looked around, and checked the address on his app. "Am I at the right place?" he wondered, starting to feel a bit frustrated. After waiting a few more minutes without any sign of anyone, he decided to call the restaurant. "Hello, Emily. It's Brian." "Hi, Brian. Is everything okay?" Emily replied on the other end. "Sort of," he said, trying to stay calm. "I think you guys wrote the address down wrong. I'm here at 12 Main Street, but there's no one here to receive the order." Emily was silent for a few seconds before letting out a sigh. "Oh, Brian, I'm sorry. That was a note-taking mistake. The correct address is 8 Central Street. I'll send it to you now." "All right," he said, although visibly irritated. "I'll head there now. I just hope the customer isn't too mad." "Good luck," Emily replied. "If you need anything, call back." Brian hung up, sighed deeply, and prepared to head to the new address. "Mr. Garcia is going to be furious, that's for sure," he thought as he started the bike again and sped through the neighborhood streets. When he finally arrived at the correct address, Brian got off the bike and saw a middle-aged man hurriedly exiting the building. The man had gray hair, was wearing a dress shirt, and appeared visibly impatient. As soon as he saw Brian, he began to complain, albeit in a more contained manner. "Finally. I thought this food would never arrive." Brian took a deep breath before responding, trying to keep his cool. "I apologize for the delay, sir. There was an error in the address, but it's all sorted out now." The man frowned and stepped closer to Brian, who was holding the bag. "Address error? Always an excuse, huh? You delivery drivers can never get a simple thing right." "I understand, sir," Brian said, trying to be polite. "But it was a problem at the restaurant, and I came as quickly as I could once the correct address was given." The man huffed, showing his irritation. "It's always the same old story. Can't you be more efficient? That's why you'll never get out of this life, you know." The words began to weigh on Brian, but he stood firm. "I'm here to deliver your food, sir. I can guarantee it's hot and in good condition." The man looked at the bag and made a dismissive gesture. "Whatever. If it's cold, I'll complain anyway. And you know what? You all just know how to do this, complain about everyone else's work while you can barely fulfill your own promises." Brian felt uncomfortable with the aggressive tone, but he tried not to let it affect him. "I do my job the best I can, sir. Everyone has their challenges." The man let out a sarcastic laugh, leaning even closer to Brian, nearly poking him in the chest. "Look at you," he started, with a tone of disdain. "Food delivery guy trying to look professional. But you're just trash, right? People like you will never get out of this." Brian felt a tightening in his chest, but he tried to maintain his composure. "I'm just trying to do my job, sir. That's all." But the man seemed determined to humiliate him further. "Oh, really? The problem is, no matter how hard you try, you'll always be nothing but dirty and worthless. People like you weren't born to have anything but misery." Brian, gripping the food bag tightly, replied in a more serious tone, "Please, I just want to deliver the order and leave. You already have the food." Mr. Garcia, however, was not intimidated. "You know what the problem is? You try to act like equals, but you never will be. Look at your skin, look at mine. You're dark, marked by work, dirt, poverty. And you think you're going to get anywhere in life looking like that? You're just modern-day slaves, you get it? No matter how hard you work, you'll always be seen as inferior." Brian began to feel anger rising within him, a mix of humiliation and helplessness. "You have no right to talk to me like that," he said, his voice trembling. But the man didn't stop. He stepped closer, now almost nose to nose with Brian. "No right? Yes, I do, because I can. I'm white, I'm rich, I'm superior to you in everything. You'll never be anything but a poor black delivery driver, you get that? And I bet your son will be the same, just another one to suffer for being born this color." These last words hit Brian like a punch to the gut. He felt his face heat up, and his fists clenched involuntarily. "Don't talk about my son," he said, his voice now filled with rage. The man let out a cruel laugh. "Oh, of course. That affects you, doesn't it? But it's the truth. Your son will be despised just like you, living on the margins, eating crumbs from others because that's what you all deserve. You'll always be seen as scum because of your skin color. You were born to be inferior, to stay below me." That was the limit for Brian. "That's enough," he shouted, his voice exploding with fury. "There you go, lose control. That's the only thing you all know how to do, act like savages," the man said, provoking him further. And then, suddenly, Mr. Garcia pushed Brian hard, hitting him in the chest. Brian lost his balance and fell backward, knocking over his motorcycle, which hit the ground with a loud crash. The rearview mirror shattered on impact, and the sight of the fallen bike seemed a reflection of the humiliation and anger he was feeling. Mr. Garcia looked at Brian on the ground and laughed even louder. "Look at you. Can't even stay on your feet. You're all weak, every last one of you. You'll never have what I have, you'll never be respected." Brian, on the ground, felt a wave of shame and humiliation he could no longer bear. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice broken. "Because I can," the man replied, his voice filled with hate. "People like you need to be reminded of the place you belong, on the ground, crawling like an animal. And that's where you'll stay for the rest of your life, along with your son." Brian could no longer contain himself. With a scream of pure fury, he quickly stood up and charged at Mr. Garcia, grabbing him by the shirt with tremendous force. "I told you not to talk about my son," he shouted, his eyes burning with rage. The man tried to break free, but Brian shoved him against the building wall brutally, tearing his shirt in the process. "You have no idea what it's like to fight every day to put food on the table. You have no idea what it's like to live with dignity when everything humiliates you. Mr. Garcia looked visibly scared, but Brian was overtaken by uncontrollable rage. He threw the first punch, hitting the man in the face. "You can't talk about my color, about my family like that," he shouted, as he delivered more blows. The man tried to shield his face with his arms, but Brian kept hitting, repeating, "No one talks about my family like that. No one." The violence of the scene attracted the attention of neighbors and relatives of Mr. Garcia, who rushed to separate the two. "Please stop this," shouted a desperate woman, while two men managed to pull Brian away from Garcia's fallen body. "You'll pay for this, you bastard," shouted Mr. Garcia, his face swollen. Brian, still panting and shaken, looked at his hands, realizing what he had done. "He deserved it," he said, his voice filled with rage and pain. "No one has the right to talk like that about my color, about my family." Neighbors called the police, and within minutes, a squad car arrived at the scene. Two officers got out of the car, looking surprised at Mr. Garcia, who was on the ground, and at Brian, still standing but visibly shaken. "What's going on here?" one of the officers asked. "This man attacked me for no reason," Mr. Garcia said, struggling. Brian, his voice trembling and his gaze lost, tried to explain. "He pushed me, said horrible things about my color, about my family. I lost control. You all will have to go to the station to register what happened," one of the officers said in an authoritative tone. "We'll sort this out there." Mr. Garcia was helped into the squad car by his family, while Brian, still in shock, was taken to another police car. Before getting in, he looked at the ground and murmured to himself, "What have I done?" At the station, the atmosphere was tense. Brian and Mr. Garcia were taken to a small room to give their statements. Brian, still trembling and with red eyes, tried to organize his thoughts. Mr. Garcia, on the other hand, looked visibly angry, with a swollen face and blood stains on his torn shirt. One officer approached Brian, beginning to ask questions. "What happened to lead to this point, sir?" Brian took a deep breath before answering. "He started insulting me, saying things about my color, my family, my son. I tried to stay calm, but he pushed me, and the bike fell. I lost control." The officer, with a serious expression, noted everything down in his notebook. "And why did you react this way?" "I know I was wrong, sir. But he crossed all limits. I can't stand being humiliated just because of my skin color and the work I do," Brian said, his voice filled with pain. The officer paused, looking into Brian's eyes. "I understand that you felt provoked, but violence isn't the answer. I'll report this as a case of provoked self-defense, considering the history of the reported offenses." Meanwhile, Mr. Garcia was in another room, demanding justice. "I want this man arrested. He attacked me for no reason," he said angrily. Another officer tried to calm him down. "Mr. Garcia, we know there was a verbal confrontation before the attack. We need to investigate further before making a final decision." After several hours of statements and discussions, both were released, as the incident didn't result in serious injuries that warranted immediate arrest, and the building's security camera footage did not capture all the details of the confrontation. The case would be handled judicially, allowing both to await the process in freedom. As they left the station, Mr. Garcia looked directly at Brian with a hateful glare. "This won't end here. I'm going to sue you and make sure you pay dearly for what you did," he said, pointing a finger at Brian. Brian simply nodded, aware of the consequences of his actions. He didn't respond, but he knew his life was about to get even more complicated. In the following days, Brian tried to resume his routine. However, the shadow of the incident loomed over him. He avoided discussing the matter with Kimberly, but it was clear she was worried. "How are you doing?" she asked one night while preparing dinner. "I don't know, Kimberly," he replied, sitting at the table with a downcast expression. "I feel like everything is falling apart. I know what I did was wrong, but I couldn't take it anymore. Kimberly approached and placed her hand on his shoulder. You're not a bad person, Brian. You were just defending our dignity. But now we have to deal with what's coming next. A few days later, while Brian was having coffee with Kimberly and their son, he heard knocking at the door. When he opened it, he saw a court officer who handed him a letter. Mr. Brian Perez? This is the notification of the lawsuit filed against you by Mr. Garcia, the officer said before leaving. Brian opened the envelope with trembling hands and began reading silently. It's what I feared, he murmured, passing the letter to Kimberly. We're going to have to go to court. The news of the lawsuit hit the family like a bomb. Kimberly, though concerned, tried to stay calm. Let's not panic. We can find a lawyer who can help us. In the following weeks, Brian and Kimberly sought legal assistance. They managed to find a community lawyer named Gary, who offered to represent them for free. It's a complicated case, Gary explained in a meeting at Brian's house. But we have a chance, especially because of the racist insults. We need to use that as a defense. Do you think we have a chance to win? Kimberly asked, her eyes hopeful. It's not guaranteed, Gary replied directly. But we're going to show the judge the full context of what happened. This could change the outcome of the trial. On the day of the trial, Brian was nervous but determined to tell his truth. The courtroom was packed, with several community members present to support Brian, knowing the difficulties he faced daily. When the judge asked Brian to speak, he stood up, his eyes fixed on the magistrate. I know I was wrong to attack Mr. Garcia, he began. But I didn't act without reason. He pushed me, insulted my skin color, and said terrible things about my family and my son. I couldn't control myself. I apologize for what I did, but I can't accept being treated this way just because of my color and the work I do. Mr. Garcia's lawyer tried to downplay the racist insults, claiming they were thoughtless words spoken in the heat of the moment. However, Gary presented testimonies from other people who stated that Mr. Garcia had acted similarly on other occasions, demonstrating a pattern of abusive behavior. The most impactful part of the trial was when Gary played the video recorded on Brian's phone, which captured part of the insults and the initial shove from Mr. Garcia. The judge watched closely, noticing the dynamics of what occurred. It's clear that the defendant acted under extreme provocation, the judge declared. While violence isn't justifiable, it's evident there was a reaction provoked by serious racial insults, which must be considered in the verdict. In the end, the judge ruled in favor of Brian, considering his actions a form of emotional self-defense, aggravated by racism. Mr. Garcia will be ordered to pay damages for moral and material harm, the judge stated as he pronounced the sentence. I hope this case serves as a warning to everyone about the destructive effects of racism and social humiliation. After the trial, Brian and Kimberly left the courtroom hand in hand, surrounded by friends and supporters. I don't know how to thank all of you, Brian said, his eyes filled with tears. You don't have to thank us, Gary replied. Just do what's right from here on out, for you and your family. With the money from the settlement, Brian was able to fix his motorcycle and buy another, safer one for work. The story of his struggle and victory spread on social media, and many people began to support him in various ways, including fundraising campaigns to help him improve his living conditions. Mr. Garcia, on the other hand, was marked by the trial. His image was tarnished in the community, and he began to be avoided by many people, especially after the exposure of his racist insults. Despite continuing to live comfortably, the impact of the trial on his reputation was significant. As for Brian, he managed to improve his family's living conditions. His son, now older, attended a better school and always looked at his father with pride. You're a hero, Dad, the boy said one night. Brian smiled, hugging his son. I'm not a hero, son. I'm just someone who didn't give up fighting for what's right. And so, despite the difficulties, Brian's life began to improve, sustained by the dignity he had reclaimed and the strength of someone who refused to be silenced. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.